It's honestly kind of wild how strong a start Versus Books had right out the gate. Founded by ex-Game Fan magazine staff in 1996, it only took them until their second book, their Final Fantasy VII guide, which I already talked about here, to become a real contender in the strategy guide world. And make no mistake, the late 90s strategy guide scene was cutthroat. Depending on how popular a game was, you might see 4 or 5 different guidebooks from competing publishers, all fighting for your attention and your wallet. Even less popular titles, as long as they came from big-name studios like Nintendo or Capcom, usually had at least a couple of official guides to choose from. Back then, home internet access was still a luxury, and Game FAQs was barely out of its infancy, far from the online staple it would later become. For most players, physical gaming magazines and strategy guides were the way to get help, unless you wanted to gamble on a pay-by-the-minute tip hotline or dubious playground rumors. Most of these books were officially licensed by the game developers, but not all. Some were completely independent, made without permission, and that's the niche Versus Books absolutely owned. As I mentioned in my previous video about them, part of Versus Books' success came from perfect timing. They launched right as video games were exploding into mainstream culture. Final Fantasy VII wasn't just a hit, it was an era-defining phenomenon that broke out beyond RPG fans into pop culture at large. And not long after, we hit 1998, one of the best years in gaming history. With just 3 guides behind them, Versus Books' 4th tackled one of the most anticipated sequels ever, Resident Evil 2. Of all the Versus Books guides I've collected, this one's easily in my top 5, maybe even top 3. Like their FF7 guide, it's both elegantly succinct and obsessively thorough, and every page is packed to the brim. Not an inch of paper goes to waste. Walkthroughs, maps, boss strategies, it's all signal, no filler. Resident Evil 2 features 4 campaigns with different events and objectives, and they somehow fit them into about 20 to 30 pages each. I love that each walkthrough page is numbered to show your progress. It's a small thing, but flipping to the next page gives this little sense of accomplishment, and helps you gauge how close you are to the end. Unlike many online walkthroughs, the Versus Books guide doesn't hold your hand. If you look at the top-rated Resident Evil guides on Game FAQs, a lot of them take the room-by-room approach, literally walking players through every single step, sometimes to a fault. They'll tell you exactly what to do in each and every room, even if the advice is as basic as, go to the next room. They even tell you exactly what to put in and take out of every item box. Versus Books doesn't assume you need that level of hand-holding. They hand you a map, point you in the right direction, and trust you to make your own calls. This leaves room for mistakes, sure, but it also respects that you'll learn from them. In short, it offers guidance without condescension, which honestly is the best kind of walkthrough. Another thing I love, it avoids spoilers. The guide doesn't warn you about upcoming jump scares. It just gives cheeky hints like you should probably have your weapon ready. It also keeps Mr. X's B-scenario appearances a mystery. They provide general strategies when he first shows up, but after that, you're on your own. Since his appearances are in truth completely scripted, this actually goes a long way to help maintain the illusion that you're being stalked. They even skip mentioning the final boss on the train so as not to spoil anything about the game's ending. Some might see these things as a downside, but I really appreciate a guide that respects the surprises of a first playthrough, not just in story, but in gameplay as well. Outside of the main walkthrough, the book includes general gameplay tips, detailed breakdowns of weapons and monsters, and some impressively specific data, including stats for secret weapons and the hidden Brad Vickers zombie. Each weapon is graded on usefulness, and the monster index goes above and beyond by listing all their possible attacks and how many hits each enemy takes from each weapon. The book also covers Resident Evil 2's bonus modes, Fourth Survivor and Tofu Survivor. This is where Versus Books does get more granular and leans into detailed room-by-room instructions, complete with strategies for both characters and diagrams where needed. The paragraphs are even color-coded to distinguish between the two runs, which is a nice touch. They do a great job outlining practical tactics that aren't overly complicated, but still effective once you get the hang of them. In fact, some of these strategies are still used by speedrunners today. It's actually where I first learned this little maneuver, which never stops feeling great to pull off. But maybe the most interesting section is the one detailing GameShark codes for the RE2 demo. These codes let players peek at unused assets in unfinished rooms, something you'd almost certainly never find in an official strategy guide. In a weird way, it's a little act of game preservation, and it makes this book stand out all the more compared to its contemporaries. That said, the book isn't perfect. Being unofficial, Versus Books didn't have Capcom's inside info, so they had to figure out the game's systems themselves. And sometimes their guesses were off. Their explanation of the ranking system assumes it's purely time-based, like the first game, when it's actually more complex than that. And their unlock requirements for secret weapons aren't quite right either, though, to be fair, even modern wikis can't fully agree on that. They also never seemed to catch on that lickers are blind. It's never mentioned anywhere, and they almost always recommend fighting them directly. To be fair, though, plenty of players still don't realize this today, even in the RE2 remake, where the game literally hands you a file spelling it out. The guide also skips over mentioning file locations most of the time. Not a big deal for casual play, but lore hunters and completionists might care. It misses a few items here and there too, mostly small things like an ink ribbon or some ammo boxes, nothing major. You could probably count the omissions on one hand, to be honest. It isn't like I was expecting them to catch something as absurdly hidden as the secret roll of film in Wesker's desk. It's such a minor Easter egg, and the method to find it is deliberately absurd. You have to search the same desk 50 times to get it. This was so obscure that no online walkthroughs even knew about it for around 15 years, until someone finally dug it up through data mining. Still, it's funny to imagine how anyone could have possibly discovered that legitimately. Like, what, was someone going around checking every desk 50 times? The maps throughout the book are all hand-drawn, which is impressive considering how accurate and detailed they are, though a couple of B-scenario boiler rooms seem to be missing. And while I love Versus Books' dense page layouts, sometimes it forces paragraphs slightly out of order to make everything fit. It's not hard to follow if you know the game well enough, but it could definitely trip up new players. Oh, and it probably goes without saying, but this guide only covers the initial PS1 version of Resident Evil 2, so there's nothing in here about Extreme Battle from the DualShock release, or any of the N64 exclusive content. Even so, this remains my go-to walkthrough for Resident Evil 2, even now that I've practically memorized the game. It's just nice to have it nearby to flip through, to admire, or to double-check something mid-playthrough. But I'd be remiss not to mention how funny this book is. Versus Books had this distinctive, irreverent sense of humor, and their Resident Evil 2 guide might be their funniest ever, in my opinion rivaled only by their Majora's Mask guide. Amid all the detailed strategies, they'll just drop jokes at the game's expense, or ridiculous unhinged tangents about Tamagotchi. Evidently, the writers really had it out for Leon. They apparently thought he was just the biggest dweeb. They're constantly roasting him with jabs at his whiny voice or his, quote, hideously concave cheekbones. One of my favorite lines comes when you play as Ada. Playing as Ada is a lot like playing as Leon, with the only difference being that Ada has a less feminine hairstyle. Interspersed throughout the book, basically whenever they had some leftover page space to fill, are little segments cheekily dubbed Resident Evil 2 Wacky Fun Land, where the writers just go off the rails pointing out weird or funny details. They highlight the bad English, the random graffiti gibberish, the fact that some poor NPC seems to have been stabbed to death with silverware and how weird it is that zombies would have the coordination to do that. My favorite is when they notice that the RPD dog kennels are labeled Rocket and JoJo, and immediately spiral into a guilt trip about how you're a monster for killing those poor zombie dogs. It's absurd, it's hilarious, and it makes this book fun to read even when you're not playing the game. It's honestly remarkable how well this guide has aged. Not just the humor, but the whole thing. Resident Evil 2 is one of my most replayed games ever, and even though I don't really need the help, I still find myself pulling this book out just for the nostalgia of it. Being unofficial means it's not perfect, but it also means it was made by actual fans who genuinely loved the game. They didn't write this because Capcom hired them to, they wrote it because they were just as hyped for Resident Evil 2 as everyone else. And man, if only they'd known what kind of year 1998 would turn out to be. The back cover proudly declares, Resident Evil 2 is the video game event of the year. Oh, you don't even know the half of it, boys. It's only January.